The Beaumont estate stood on Prytaneer Street like a Baroque question no one dared answer. 3 stories of stucco, the color of clotted cream. Wrought iron balconies tangled in trumpet vine. Shutters perpetually half-closed as if the house were too polite to stare back at the city it once ruled. On the August morning I first crossed its threshold, the air smelled of bay rum and thunderstorms, and somewhere in the distance the St. Charles streetcar bell clanged a warning no one inside seemed to hear. I had come to New Orleans to settle wills, not tempests. The telegram from Judge Roussel was crisp. Estate of Beaumont requires neutral executor. Confidentiality paramount. Fee commensurate. My Boston firm considered me neutral by virtue of pedigree northern, unentangled with Creole bloodlines, and young enough at 32 to lack a reputation anyone could blackmail. I arrived with a valise, a linen suit, and the assumption that even the most vaunted Southern dynasty could not surprise a lawyer who had clerked under Oliver Wendell Holmes. I held that assumption precisely 10 minutes. The foyer swallowed me. In mahogany gloom, gasoliers hissed at half pressure. Their chimneys flickered with blue tongues that licked gilt molding and retreated. 2 footmen in livery, the shade of withered moss, took my hat and coat, eyes sliding past me as if they feared to fix on any moving thing. Beyond them unrolled a corridor longer than the nave of Trinity Church, lined on both sides with portraits nearly ceiling high. Dozens of Beaumont ancestors gazed from frames carved like Baroque altarpieces, men in powdered wigs, women swathed in taffeta, a few distant forebears rendered in oil so dark their faces hovered like moons in eclipse. Yet what struck me was the uncanny uniformity. Each figure's head turned subtly toward the corridor, body angled 3/4, eyes painted with preternatural acuity, pupils ringed in lacquer so glossy that when the gaslight trembled, reflections darted across them like sparks. Every set of eyes faced forward, aligned on an invisible meridian toward the place where I now stood. I cleared my throat, boots echoing. Somewhere deep in the corridor, a grandfather clock ticked with the deliberate authority of a courtroom stenographer. An elderly butler, skin the color of pipe tobacco and jacket, cut in a style 20 years unfashionable, emerged from a side alcove. Mr. Charles Duval? His diction bore the faint rasp of St. Kitts mingled with the lilt of Louisiana French. At your service. I attempted a bow that looked more like a lurch. The heat already glued my collar to my neck. Madame awaits in the Salon Rouge. This way, sir. He set off, cane tapping the parquet. Portrait eyes seemed to pivot with every step, but I blamed. The gaslight had danced on convex varnish, animating what was still. I followed, focusing on the butler's measured gait, and not on the painted aristocrat, whose gaze I could swear slid from my shoulder, blades to the back of my skull. The Salon Rouge lived up to its moniker, walls clad in damask, the hue of overripe. Strawberries, velvet drapes heavy as gilt, and at the center a chaise longue occupied by Eugenie Beaumont, doyenne of the clan. She was small, spine as erect as a rapier, hair silver and styled in a sculptural swirl, face powdered to ghostliness. That made her garnet earrings glow like coals. A silver chatelaine jangled at her waist, keys and scissors shimmering. Her eyes, true eyes, not painted, held the glossy sharpness that money and secrets polish over generations. Mr. Duval. She inclined her head less than a degree. Judge. Roussel assures me of your discretion. Discretion is the backbone of probate, madame. I bowed again, conscious of sweat trickling under my waistcoat. She gestured to a burger. I sat, knees sinking into upholstery that smelled faintly of camphor and rosewater. My husband Etienne left instructions that upon his passing, the estate would remain undivided until our eldest surviving child attained 25, whereupon succession should proceed by natural course. Unfortunately, natural course has grown unnatural. Her lacquered nails tapped a folded crepe fan. My firstborn Felipe vanished 2 years ago. No ransom, no remains. My second Camille, Inherits by default but turns 25 next month. A joyous occasion, I would think. Her lips curved like a scythe. The house has other ideas. I waited, pen poised. Silence throbbed until the butler deposited a sterling tray with 2 glasses of iced tea that sweated like guilty brows. Madame Beaumont dismissed him with a flick. The door clicked. Her gaze sharpened. "This family bears a superstition older than the plaster on these walls," she whispered. "When the rightful heir walks the portrait corridor under moonlight, the paintings will choose by turning their eyes toward the successor. The chosen must then spend 1 hour alone in the hall, bearing witness to the lineage. Only afterward may daylight confirm the inheritance." My own succession occurred thus. So did my father's. But in recent generations, the chosen heirs, her fingers tightened on the fan, have not returned. "Felipe?" My voice came thin, and my brother Jules before him. In 52, the ledger marks them presumed drowned or lost at sea. Convenient fictions. "They vanished on land, Mr. Duval, feet from my door." I scribbled but kept skepticism from my tone. "Why summon an executor now?" "Because Camille intends to walk the corridor on her birthday, and I fear the portraits will blink again." Her gaze broke, drifting to the parlor arch where a younger woman now stood a study in chiaroscuro. Dark ringlets, ivory shoulders, eyes green as absinthe and twice as intoxicating. She wore a tea gown of palest jade that fluttered with each controlled breath. I rose. "Miss Camille, I presume." "Soon to be Mrs. if my fiance's ship ever docks," she answered, the accent pure Garden District drawl with a hint of Parisian varnish. "But yes, for now Camille Beaumont at your service." Her smile carried defiance and something like daredevilry. I felt the room tilt. Her mother's fan snapped open. "Charles Duval, estate attorney. He will oversee the transfer." "Ah." "The man assigned to ensure I don't disappear into the wallpaper." Camille glided forward, extending a hand. When our palms touched, a spark static or nerves jumped. She lowered her voice. "Do you believe in portraits that swallow heirs?" "Mr. Duval?" "I believe wills can be more dangerous than weapons," I replied. She laughed, a sound brushed with sadness. Over dinner braised duck with mirliton. Sweet potatoes steeped in rum conversation skated across polite surfaces while undertows swirled beneath. The dining room boasted more portraits, smaller but equally watchful. Every so often Camille's gaze flicked to her painted ancestors, lips tensing as if tasting bitterness. Madame spoke of sugar futures and cathedral renovations. I parried with references to interstate commerce. When dessert arrived, champagne ices that stung the palate thunder grumbled beyond closed shutters. And somewhere in the corridor, frame creaked. Later, settled in a guest suite that smelled of cedar and long-dead relatives, I unpacked my writing kit. Rain hammered the shutters like urgent knuckles. Fatigue sagged my shoulders, yet curiosity prickled. I donned a dressing gown, pocketed a small electric torch I'd purchased in New York, a novelty of dry cell science, and slipped into the hall. Gas sconces guttered low, casting the portrait corridor in amber gloom. Clapboards sighed, adjusting to barometric whims. At my approach, the painted eyes seemed to brighten. I tested a theory, stepped left, then right. I could swear pupils tracked me. Paint canopies illusions, I told myself. Yet a chill spidered down my spine. Halfway down the corridor, I paused before a portrait, unlike the others. A young man in naval coat, hair the color of café au lait, one eyebrow cocked as if amused. A plaque read Jules Beaumont, 1830 to 1852. Brushwork exquisite, varnish still luminous. I angled the torch beam. The eyes glittered uncanny. When I raised the light higher, something moved inside the paint, no behind it. A shadow flitted across the pupils, like a fish darting in dark waters. Floorboards groaned behind me. I wheeled. Nothing. Only painted faces, quietly ravenous. A gust rattled a shutter, thunder blasted. Gaslight flickered out, leaving me in blue-white torch beam. In that strobe, each canvas face seemed momentarily animate, mouths hinting at speech, hands tensing on painted lapels. I backed away, torch trembling, until my shoulder struck cold plaster. The corridor yawned both directions like a gullet. Footsteps padded swift behind the far arch, bare feet on parquet. Torch darted. Camille emerged, hair unpinned, eyes wide. She pressed a finger to her lips, seized my free hand, and pulled me into a side stairwell. The door shut, muffling storm. She leaned against the paneled wall, breath ragged. You felt it too. The eyes? Thunder cracked overhead. I steadied my voice. They follow. It's worse at night, she hugged herself. I've walked this house since infancy. Once the sun sets, those portraits breathe. I used to think it was a child's fancy, until Philippe dared the corridor ceremony. He joked it would be just him and a parade of dead uncles. We watched from the antechamber through the keyhole. She swallowed. At first he chuckled, tipping his hat to each frame. Then his laughter stopped. The gaslights like tonight flickered out. When they relit, he was gone, the hallway empty. Her voice cracked, left behind his shoes. They faced the last portrait, our great-great-grandmother, the one who founded the sugar empire. Camille shivered, though the stairwell stifled. Mother says the house chooses. That the corridor's curse keeps the fortune intact by demanding a Beaumont heart every generation. I pictured the ledger figures, inheritance by devouring. But curses shy from sunlight. Logic might unmask illusions. Walls hold hidden doors, I suggested. Peepholes, moving panels. If someone orchestrated disappearance. Camille's eyes flashed. Prove it before my birthday. I will not be the next pair of shoes. I unfolded a plan. Mapped the corridor. Inspect wainscot for seams. Test each frame's depth with calipers, trace wiring. Interview staff. She agreed to grant access while Madame attended Mass tomorrow. Yet even as we planned, dread edged the air like plotting escape on the deck of a ship no longer certain. To float. We parted near dawn. I reached my chamber, found a sealed envelope under the door. Inside lay a daguerreotype of Jules Beaumont's portrait. Eyes rigorously centered, but on the plate, his pupils veered, unmistakably, toward the spot where I had stood earlier. Scrawled on the back in cramped ink, "Do not let the eyes find." You twice. My pulse thudded. A trick? But who would risk an exposure plate merely to unnerve an outsider? Sleep dripped away like condensation. Rain ceased. Cicadas resumed their threnody. Somewhere a piano sounded 3 hesitant notes, then fell silent. At breakfast, Madame announced Camille's fiancé, Mr. Daniel Hawthorne of Massachusetts, had telegraphed delay. Fierce storms off Cape Hatteras forced his steamer back to harbor. Madame's lips tightened, but Camille merely nodded, eyes cool. I wondered if Hawthorne knew the corridor might claim his intended bride before he ever set foot on Prytania Street. By late morning, Madame climbed into a barouche, bound for the cathedral, leaving me the run of the mansion. Camille met me at the corridor entrance, lantern in hand, hair braided businesslike. The portraits watched in brazen daylight, glint subdued but not sleeping. I'll start at the north wall, I said. Look for hinges disguised as molding. She nodded, producing a chalk nub. We mark every board we tap. 2 hours later, my knuckles raw. We had chalked in half the wainscot, no hollow thud, no secret latch. The frames themselves proved. Deep canvas stretched over wood at least a foot thick, but fixed by rusted nails. I considered removing one for autopsy, but hammer strokes might rouse Madame's suspicion. Instead, I pried at molding with a putty knife. Nothing. Camille perched on a stepladder, peering behind a Venetian sconce. Perhaps the disappearance occurs metaphysically, she offered, half joking. A portal through pigment. Even portals need plumbing, I muttered, tracing hairline fissures where floor met baseboard. A faint draft kissed my fingertips from behind the Jules portrait. I pressed ear to wall. A whisper of air, steady as breath through a keyhole. Camille's. Eyes widened. A passage? Or a ventilation chase? I marked the spot, resolving to return with drill and borescope. Footsteps echoed. A maid hurried past, dust cloth trembling. She crossed herself when eyes met ours. Afternoon gloomed. I suggested a recess. Camille lingered, gaze snagged by the portrait of a Regency belle, brandishing a rose. They all look so alive, she murmured, as if waiting. I answered lightly, but weight pressed my chest. The corridor felt narrower, portraits leaning an inch closer. When we turned, I noticed something my memory swore different. Jules's painted head now tilted a fraction more toward corridor center. Impossible oil cannot shift in hours. I rubbed tired eyes, dismissed the fear as fatigue. At supper, Madame returned, veil damp from incense-laden air, eyes sharp as tacks. She questioned my day's progress. I recited innocuous findings. Camille excused herself early, complaining of headache. Shortly after, thunder resumed summer's evening encore. Madame retired. Staff scurried to bolt shutters. I paced my room. Journal open, pen refusing to move. Midnight loomed, heavier than ordnance. In the hush between thunderclaps, a sound crept under my door, faint scrape of canvas on wood, as if someone large shuffled narrow hallways. I drew the electric torch, stepped into corridor. Gas flames extinguished one by one ahead of me. Pop like matchheads pinched. Darkness swallowed ancestral visages. Only my torch cast a narrow spear. Its circle landed on Jules, the portraits. Eyes no longer met mine. They traversed right, toward Camille's wing of the house. Paint glistened wet, as if freshly applied. Blood iced. I raced down corridor, footsteps deafening. At Camille's door I pounded. No answer. I burst in. Room empty. Balcony window gaped, curtains flogged by wind. On the parquet lay her embroidered house slippers, toes pointing toward the corridor. Lightning flashed. On the gallery below, a white figure in nightdress drifted toward the portrait hall, footsteps soundless. I bolted after, heart cannoning. Torch beam jittering, the figure slid between frames. Each painted face ignited, pupils blazing gold. Portraits turned in synchronous pivot, eyes tracking their living descendant. Camille halted at the hallway midpoint, as though gravity of ancestry pinned her. She turned, eyes unfocused, lips forming words I could not hear. The torch flickered. Gaslights sputtered and died. Darkness roared. I lunged, arms out, but an icy gust slammed me against paneling. The corridor shrank, portraits looming, brushstrokes rippling like muscle. A cacophony of canvas rustle, frame creak, whispered names gusted around me. Philippe, Jules, Calypso, Silent Grace. My torch died. Silence detonated. When I struck matches, corridor lay empty. Camille gone. Portraits motionless, eyes serene, except Jules, his painted lips now curled in half-smile. As if amused by my tardiness, the shoes remained, pointed at the last portrait, the Regency belle with the rose Camille's own namesake ancestor. Painted hand now held not a flower, but a single real braid of dark hair. Thunder boomed. Rain sluiced windows. I stood among ancestors and failure, shuddering with the realization that the corridor had claimed another heir, and I had witnessed the appetite made flesh by brush and varnish. Morning would bring questions I could not answer, a matriarch whose gaze could shatter stone, and the inexorable approach of Camille's birthday, with no heir left to offer, save perhaps myself. And somewhere behind oil and canvas, mechanisms or spirits, or both waited for the next blink of eyes. Rain stunned the windows with a percussion that seemed to keep time with my pulse. I braced both palms on the corridor wall, gulping air that smelled of linseed and ozone. willing myself to accept that Camille Beaumont flesh and wit and laughter had dissolved into the maw of a painted corridor while I did nothing but wave a useless electric torch. My shoulders shook once, not quite a sob, more a recoil of rage. I forced the lawyer's habit of methodical thought over the horror. A disappearance is a set of steps. Steps can be retraced. First, witness and evidence. Her slippers remained. Embroidered satin left precisely where Philippa's shoes had been described, pointing toward the portraits, toes perfectly aligned. I slid them aside with a penknife, crouched to inspect the floor. A faint crescent of soot curved before the slippers, as if something hot in metal had touched the parquet. I pressed a fingertip. The residue smeared oily black, not soot graphite. I pocketed a sample in a wax paper envelope. Lightning stuttered past the shutter louvers, revealing the streak of canvas behind Jules's portrait where I'd sensed the draft. A logical mind might assume a hidden door. Yet my logical mind was at war with the memory of paint moving like wet eyes. I fetched a sturdy claw hammer from the servant's pantry, returned, and wedged its tongue between frame and wall. The nails fought. The frame groaned. Varnish flaked like dandruff. With a final wrench, the portrait heaved forward, and I glimpsed darkness where plaster should be. A passage, only 8 inches deep at eye level, but deeper below, dropping into vertical gloom. The odor stale air tinged with paraffin and something organic, like damp rope coiled around my throat. I swung the torch beam down. Wooden pegs protruded inside the cavity, each peg capped with a glass lens no bigger than my thumb. A periscope lattice, mirrors angled to send light and perhaps an image somewhere deeper. Whoever installed this device had aimed the uppermost mirror directly behind Jules's pupils. A trick, eyes that could physically pivot by rod or cord. Someone watching unseen, rage flared. Could physical machinery alone spirit a woman from a hallway? The gap widened toward the floor. Perhaps a crawlspace ran beneath the portraits. A hush behind me. I turned, expecting footmen, but saw instead Philippa's portrait, further down the hall, tilting on one corner as though nudged from behind. A length of black thread snaked from its frame, disappeared beneath Persian runner. I knelt. The thread ran taut toward the servant's staircase, fibers humming faintly, as if just plucked. I followed the thread to a hinged wainscot, the exact hue of the runner's border camouflaged until one knew to kneel. It opened on silent brass pivots, exposing a stair narrower than a coffin, dropping steep into the house's foundations. My torch flickered. Lightning died outside. The mansion inhaled deeper dark. I slipped through, closing the panel behind me with a click that sounded very final. Smothering heat rose. The air tasted of turpentine and beeswax. Stairs descended 20 feet to a flagged corridor lit by bare electric bulbs, the new carbon filament type, humming with weak orange glow. Their feed wire ran along the ceiling toward some unseen generator. The black thread ended at a pulley, rig that connected to a vertical shaft, a system that could, by weight or clockwork, tug at each painting's support, making them swivel in unison. Illusion explained half of it at least. I paused, listening. The house above boomed with thunder, but beneath that I heard water dripping and a faint metallic churn, as of gears grinding against barely greased axles. I advanced. The passage opened. On a long chamber running parallel to the portrait corridor, a hidden twin. Here the opposite sides were lined not with gilded frames, but with apparatus, periscope boxes, gearing, counterweights, each aligned behind its matching painting. Some mechanisms were pristine, others rusted, trailing spiderwebs. At the midpoint, fresh footprints marred dustbare, feminine. My stomach clenched. I called Camille's name. Echo answered, hollow. The footprints led toward a brick arch and a steel door ajar. I slipped through and froze. A subterranean studio stretched before me, lit by a hurricane lamp and choked with canvases stacked like library books. Easels held half-finished likenesses, the deck officer of a steamship, a girl in bloomers on a velocipede, an infant with a yellow ribbon, all unfinished, all lacking pupils. On a central dais stood the portrait of Camille, or what would become. It canvas taller than life, her face blocked in deathstrokes, but eyes blank. Beside it languished her nightdress over a dressmaker's form, slippers pinned to the base. I felt simultaneously voyeur and trespasser, but terror trumped guilt as I noted a dark doorway at the back, curtains swaying inward as if disturbed minutes ago. I pulled back the cloth and entered a cylindrical room whose walls were ringed with more portraits, these smaller, like antechamber saints in a crypt. They bore names I recognized: Philippe, Jules, ancestors long dead, each canvas perforated. With a little peephole through one pupil, the remaining eye painted open, watchful. In the center of the floor yawned a square shaft descending into blackness. A rope ladder dangled. From below rose a voice-soft male, singing something half French, half breath. And beneath it, a whisper of Camille's voice, shaky but alive. Relief surged, tethered to caution. I clipped a torch to my belt, grasped the ladder, and descended. 20 feet down, boots landed on damp clay. The glow of a single candle revealed vaulted brick, maybe an old slave-holding cellar left off. Estate plans. The singing stopped. I stepped forward. "Miss Beaumont, it's Charles." A figure emerged from shadow, a man of 35, broad-shouldered, with the angular cheekbones of the Beaumont lineage, though his beard had grown wild. He wore a painter's smock smudged with raw umber and battledress trousers cut at the calf. One hand clutched a palette, the other a sable brush dripping black. His eyes burned with manic brilliance. "Philippe?" I breathed. He bowed slightly, then twirled the brush. "Older but not entire," he said, voice rough as river stones. "My sister chose a gallant guardian to come chase the ghosts." Behind him, Camille stepped into the candlelight, wrists bound with ribbon the color of her nightdress, face flushed but defiant. I surged forward. Philippe raised the brush like a duelist's foil. "Stay. The final stroke must yet be drawn." I forced calm. "Explain this madness." He gestured at stacked canvases. "Artistic endeavor, ancestral preservation. The Beaumont line cannot be allowed to thin by venal marriage to a Massachusetts banker." His tone sharpened. "Camille would surrender blood rights for love. I cannot permit it. Thus I paint her immortal, here among those who understand duty." Camille spat a word in French, traitor or monster, I couldn't discern. Philippa's gaze flicked up. "The portraits above are husks now. I gutted them to watch, to listen, but the house hungers for fresh visages. Mine had already consumed long story, which I survived by breaking faith with surface living. Jules, too. He served as mentor." He pointed to a moldering skeletonist portrait in the corner. "Jules without eyes. We paint heirs before the corridor claims them, seal them below. The house is sated, fortune intact." He stepped closer, breath smelling of turpentine. "Hand Camille back to me." I shook my head. "Your mother believes her children vanished to curses. You would confirm the myth with murder?" Philippa's grin flashed. "Not murder, transference. Flesh fades, art endures. She lived forever on the wall." Camille's glare cut glass. "Father's legacy is blood and sugar, not brushstrokes of madness." Philippe lunged. I parried the brush aside. Sable dug my forearm, burning with whatever pigment he laced. Camille kicked his shin. He stumbled. I seized her ribbon bonds, tore them free. She sprinted toward the ladder. Philippe recovered, flung the palette at my head. It exploded in pigments. He tackled me. We crashed into a support pillar. Debris rained. Dust choked. In the scramble, my torch flicked on, beam landing on a recess behind Philippe, a pulley tied to multiple ropes, their ends disappearing into ceiling and floor. Counterweight system, perhaps meant to animate portraits, maybe more. I blindly swung the torch, smashing the pulley wheel. Ropes snapped upward through ceiling slits above. A symphony of wrenching wood echoed. Felipe screamed, scrambling past me toward the shaft, but I grabbed his ankle. We grappled in clay until Camille's voice rang from above, urgent. The corridor paintings falling. A shockwave rolled above, dust puffing down. Felipe threw me off, bolted up ladder. I chased. Reaching the portrait ring, I saw canvases. Tilting outward, frames collapsing like dominoes, each failing pulley releasing tension as I destroyed the hub. The corridor overhead groaned like a doomed ship. Camille and Felipe reached the studio dais amidst raining dust. Felipe grabbed a ragged canvas knife, brandished it. A beam splintered. Plaster hailstormed. I screamed for Camille to run. She dashed, hurdling fallen frames, vanishing up the narrow servant passage. Felipe advanced on me, eyes feral. I backed, found my heel on the balcony balustrade, overlooking foyer void 30 feet dropped to marble. Portrait debris crashed below. Felipe slashed. Knife caught my lapel. I shoved. He staggered onto the balustrade, arms windmilling. For a heartbeat we locked gazes, mind pleading, his furious, then lost. The railing gave. He toppled backward. A blur of white smock and red anguish, landing in a grotesque echo of a Renaissance martyr. Silence followed, broken only by the grandfather clock's steady tick. Camille burst from stairwell, hair chalked with dust, eyes wide. I descended, breaths ragged, kneeling beside Felipe. Pulse absent. A smear of crimson spread like careless paint, life's pigment spent. Madame Beaumont appeared at the foyer arch, nightdress and pearls incongruous. She took in the wreckage, her fallen son, remaining portraits askew like slack marionettes. One hand covered her mouth. The other clutched chatelaine keys that jingled in mourning. Her stare impaled me. I began to explain constructor tunnels. Inheritance mania, but words cracked like dried paint. Camille knelt by her brother, touched his cheek, whispered a Gaelic prayer. Madame trembled once, then straightened, spine steel. She stepped to Philippa's body, raised scissors from her chatelaine, and snipped a lock of his hair. Without a word, she strode down servant staircase toward the buried studio. I moved too. Block. Camille shook her head. Let her. Minutes passed while we stood amid ruined lineage. When Madame returned, she carried no braid, only an extinguished hurricane lamp. She surveyed smashed frames, blank canvas eyes, and exhaled as if some epic inside her had ended. Call the undertaker, she said to no one and everyone. Dawn seeped through cracked shutter. Camille and I stepped into the corridor. The mechanical contrivance lay demolished, gears and mirrors exposed like organs of a gutted beast. The portraits, freed from unseen tethers, hung listless. The eyes no longer tracked. Morning light revealed them as ordinary pigment on cloth, illusions broken. Camille faced the Regency bell, the final portrait that once held a real Braid, now empty-handed, only flaking paint in place of rose. I refuse the corridor, she said, voice hoarse. The estate will divide. Money to sugar workers, house to preservation trust. No more heirs feeding ghosts. I offered legal strategy. She nodded absently, gaze on sunlight slicing dust. Moats. The house was never alive, she said softly. People let it breathe through fear. Felipe gave it breath. I will give it rest. We buried Felipe at Lafayette Cemetery beneath angel statuary whose eyes could stare only heavenward. Madame attended veiled, silent. Camille placed a single white iris, turned away. 3 weeks later, I boarded the northbound train. Before departure, Camille pressed a parcel into my hand. Jules Beaumont's stolen sketchbook, discovered in the studio wreckage. Proof, she said, that talent and madness shared his heart. Inside, I later found charcoal studies of Hidden mechanisms, meticulous diagrams, plus a final entry. When the eyes move of their own accord, the house will finally be sated. Dated the night before Jules vanished. I never learned what Madame did with the snipped lock. Some say a new, smaller portrait joined the corridor, hanging in an unlit alcove beyond tourist rope, its eyes forever closed. Renovation guides assure visitors the corridor no longer whispers, but cleaners claim they find graphite dust beneath the wainscot every rainstorm. As for Camille, she sailed for Europe with Daniel Hawthorne 6 months later, leaving trustees to dismantle sugar fields and fund hospitals. Letters arrive postmarked Vienna, Florence, Toulouse, each brimming with quicksilver descriptions of museums and plazas, never once mentioning portraits. She signs simply, "You're still watching the living world." See. On quiet nights in Boston, when thunderstorms roll off the harbor, I sometimes wake imagining an eye's glossy flick behind paintings in probate parlors. Then I remind myself, illusions require conspirators. I close the curtains, trust the linen canvas on my wall to remain still, and draft wills that keep houses from breathing on their owners ever again. Everything should have ended with the coroner's wagon, the fresh grave, and the closed for restoration placard hammered across the Beaumont gate. Yet endings written in ink often blur when confronted by paint that never fully dries. 6 months after I left New Orleans, a terse cable yanked me south again. Beaumont corridor reopening. A.S. Public Museum. Staff report unexplained incidents. Need legal counsel and calm head. Stop. Come at once. Fraser. Trust curator. Fraser was the archivist Camille hired to convert the mansion into a foundation for medical charities. If she, a woman whose pulse barely rose when cataloging Civil War surgical saws, wrote unexplained, something inside Beaumont House was stirring. I sent Camille a letter care of Vienna, but received no reply. She and Hawthorne were rumored to be roaming the Balkans. So I disembarked in a sweltering August dawn to face unfinished corridors alone. The facade looked fresher, ivy-trimmed. Wrought iron balconies repainted a sober black, but the air still clung thick with sugar rot and humidity. Inside, scaffold poles flanked the foyer where portraits once crashed. Bare walls waited for curatorial choices. Only plaques labeled where treasures would hang. The corridor itself had been narrowed by glass partitions to protect visitors. Track. Lighting gleamed from a new electrical panel redesigned by engineers I trusted. The house, outwardly, was tamed. Fraser met me by the ticket desk wearing linen trousers and a tool belt. Her hair was scraped into a ferocious bun. Fatigue mapped the skin beneath her eyes. 2 docents quit this week, she said by way of greeting. Each swore they saw canvases breathe. There are no canvases left, I reminded her. She pulled a key ring from her belt. That's what I'd like you to verify. She led me past velvet ropes into an area labeled conservation. In progress. At the corridor's midpoint, plywood sealed what used to be the secret stair to Philippe's studio. A padlock shone new. Around its hasp, soot marks fanned like fingerprints. Fraser knelt, tapped plywood knuckles. Security heard hammering. In here after hours like someone framing canvas. But no one had a key except me, and I never opened it. She unlocked the padlock. We eased the panel aside. The air inside smelled of turpentine and roses long past their prime. Spotlights revealed. An easel, empty but for a linen groundcoat, halfway primed. Paint tubes littered the floor like shedskins, and at the foot of the easel lay a small oak casket. Its lid bore a brass plate engraved with Philippe's initials. I knelt, prying it open. A braid of dark hair coiled inside a woman's, tied with crimson ribbon. Not the gray lock Madame had cut from her dead son. This was younger, glossier, unmistakably Camille's. My gut folded. Had Madame harvested it before Camille sailed? Or had Camille mailed it home as some morbid keepsake? Either option chilled me. On the easel stretcher, a faint charcoal outline ghosted across the primed cloth. A woman seated, head turned slightly, eyes omitted. The sketch could have been anyone, yet the tilt of shoulders suggested Camille. Next to the easel, a palette knife lodged in wood floorboards as though stabbed there. Fraser exhaled. The house is painting itself again. Or someone is helping it, I muttered. We took the casket to her office. I asked after Madame Beaumont. Fraser's jaw tightened. She has not set foot on property since the funeral, but donations flow monthly from her personal account, no return address. Phone calls went unanswered, letters returned unopened. Madame had retreated into myth while her house prepared a fresh canvas. I spent the afternoon tracing inventory sheets. Every surviving portrait older than 1850 had been removed to Tulane's conservation labs, yet 3 modern ones slated for storage were missing. 2 depicted distant cousins, the third, a nanny. Staff assumed they'd been sent for cleaning, but no work orders existed. I requested lantern slides from the photographic archive. Their eyes, like Jules's, were painted with high gloss varnish. That night I convinced Fraser to cut power to the corridor, station guards at each ground floor exit, and leave me alone with a camera, notebook, and coil of rope. Midnight found me crouched inside the former studio, listening to hammer blows of my heart. Outside, rain gathered, reminding me of the last storm. At 12:17 a.m., faint footfalls crept down the servants' passage. I doused my lamp. A sliver of red light seeped under the studio door, pulsing like a heartbeat. Silently, I cracked the door. The corridor beyond lay empty, except for a new portrait propped against scaffolding. It was unfinished, only background and shoulders blocked in, but the likeness was obvious. Daniel Hawthorne, Camille's fiancé, eyes unpainted hollows. My scalp prick lead. Cloth rustled behind me. I spun. A figure in a painter's smock, too. Small to be Felipe, stepped from darkness, clutching a bristle brush. Gaslight from his lantern revealed wax-pale cheeks, filigree veins. A wax effigy? No, a child, perhaps 10 years old, hair silver as Madame's. The boy regarded me with unsettling calm and lifted an index finger to painted lips. On his smock pocket embroidered initials, G.M. Grace. Mackenzie, indicated by the key on Madame's chatelaine, had been the orphaned ward of Eugenie's grandmother. She died without children. Yet here stood a boy bearing her initials. Beaumont. Genealogy board dark tangles I'd never fully mapped. The child stepped toward the fresh Hawthorne portrait, dipped his brush into a pot of crimson so dark it looked black, and stroked the first curve of an iris. The paint bead glistened alive. I snapped from paralysis, seizing the brush. Cold pierced my skin. A shock sizzled like static. The boy's eyes flared guilt for an instant, then dulled. He released the brush, retreated into gloom, melted like smoke. I staggered, heart ramming ribs. The half-painted iris contracted, as if sensing its incomplete state. Before logic regained command, I fetched a rag and scrubbed the line away, smearing pigment. For an instant the smear looked like blood on canvas, then flaked off as ordinary paint. I slumped against scaffolding. The corridor lights crackled. Spots illuminated every unfinished portrait that had vanished from inventory, now lining the wall again. Each bore a single stroke, one pupil, no twin. It struck me, the Beaumont curse required a pair of painted eyes to magnetize the living counterpart. Without completion, the enchantment or trick remained inert. Someone or something was attempting to finish them. I recalled Jules's sketchbook line, "When the eyes move of their own accord, the house will finally be sated." Jules and Felipe had dedicated their lives to giving the house eyes, mechanical or otherwise, to watch heirs and claim them. Now, with Felipe dead, the duty had passed to another vessel, perhaps the childlike specter, or perhaps Madame herself working through proxies. But why paint Hawthorne? Because Camille no longer carried Beaumont blood alone. Marriage would dilute the lineage, so the house turned its hunger to the outsider, threatening the bloodline's purity. A thunderclap rattled plaster. I wrapped the hair braid in cloth, slotted it into my pocket, and climbed to Fraser's supervisor's loft. She greeted me bleary-eyed. I set the braid on her blotter. "We burn it," I said, "and every unfinished canvas." Fire in a heritage mansion is heresy, but Fraser nodded. We gathered kerosene, dragged portraits to the central courtyard. Under shrouded sky, staff joined, whispers flying. Before the first match struck, a carriage clattered outside. Madame Beaumont, draped in black taffeta, stepped through the gate as if conjured. Rain traced silver rivers down her veil. "What spectacle is this?" Her voice cut softer than before, as if morning cut vocal cords. I met her gaze. "Your house paints heirs to feed a curse." "Not a curse," she replied. "A covenant forged when our ancestor Marguerite saved this city from yellow fever." She offered a portrait corridor to hold the sickness. "Each generation renews the bargain. The price is likenesses' eyes that stay open so living Beaumonts may close theirs in safety." "Your son is dead," I said. "Philippe killed by that covenant." Her chin quivered, but steel remained. "Better one life than a city's plague." The corridor must always watch. Fraser's jaw dropped. "You mean to keep feeding portraits?" Madame produced a silver box, identical to Philippe's, but smaller. Inside lay a single hazel eye, a glass eye. "Hawthorne's likeness must guard Camille overseas. Without watcher, distance will doom her. The house paints, I deliver. Legacy is maintained." I realized then, the corridor's power was not mystical but psychological, reinforced by generations of manipulation. Where belief joined hidden mechanisms, accidents became destiny. Madame, Jules-Philippe, they perpetuated myth to protect. Patrimony, sacrificing kin to fear. I stepped forward, held out the braid. "Camille's life belongs to herself. Your watch ends tonight." Madame's gaze lingered on the braid, then slid to unfinished portraits. For a heartbeat emotion warred. Across her cheeks regret, rage. She snatched the braid, marched toward the courtyard pyre, and tossed it atop canvases. Oil-laden hair caught flame with a hiss. Staff-fed kerosene. Tongues of red devoured linen, knots of paint bubbling like infected blisters. Rain became downpour. But flames roared. Freed by stiff autumn wind up the chimney of courtyard walls. Madame watched flaming eyes shrivel, arms wrapped tight. When the last canvas sagged into ash, she turned to me hollow-eyed. "It will find another way," she whispered. "You will learn you cannot gaze forever without blinking." She let herself be led away by Fraser into carriage, veiled against the smell of smoke and wet paint. I watched headlamps vanish down Prytania Street, wondering whether grief or guilt clenched her spine straighter. Work crews removed the corridor's back paneling, dismantled periscope tubes, sanded walls. Hawthorne arrived by steamer 2 weeks later, bewildered but alive, and proposed to Camille in Vienna, where telegram lines outpaced curses. They married in a civil ceremony. No portraits allowed. The Beaumont mansion reopened as a medical charity museum devoted to public health history. Visitors marvel at antique surgical kits and sugar baron ledgers. In the corridor now hang only mirrors etched with epidemiological data, plain facts, reflecting living faces rather than painted watchers. Sometimes tourists swear reflections linger a beat too long. The docents chalk it up to old glass and humidity. I kept one artifact, the silver box with its single glass eye. On nights when thunder licks the harbor, I set it on my desk, open the lid, and stare until my own eyes water. The pupil never moves, yet some instinct makes me close the lid before sleep, as if compassionately granting the house's last sentinel a moment of night. If Camille writes, she signs, still wide awake and unpainted. That is enough. The corridor's hunger, once fed by silence and superstition, Starved under bright scrutiny, proof that sometimes the surest exorcism is demolition of hidden hinges and the refusal to surrender bodies to stories. Yet when lightning flashes, I sometimes imagine an unfinished portrait smoldering in attic darkness somewhere, a brush lifting under invisible hand. And I remind myself again, destroy the tools, break the myth, and keep the living far from corridors where paint waits for pupils.